Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you may be. My name is Lewis. Just had a bit of a shave. I got bored in lockdown, and today we're going to do something a little bit different. Today we're going to be giving you my non-fiction bookcase tour. That's right, I've got a few, so let's get started. I have divided them up into different sections. So first we have all my books on football, and then religion. Then we have my memoirs, including medical, comedic. Then we have my single cookbook here, some books on music and art. Then we have what originally was my humour shelf and then became a mixture of humour and sociology. And then we've ended up with a bit extra travel stuff. Down here we have all of my science books and my environmentalism books. And then right at the bottom we have all my history books, because it's important to have a fundamental foundation of history, as well as some books on creative writing. Up we have Diego Armando Maradona's Touched by God, how he won the Mexico '86 World Cup. I've talked about this on the channel before, but it's a really interesting book in understanding the mindset of an athlete of his caliber. We have this lovely first edition of Sober by Tony Adams, which is a sequel to his smash hit Addicted. And it's even signed, even though I've yet to meet Tony Adams. We also have this edition of Sober by Tony Adams, which has a new excerpt about Arsene Wenger, the greatest manager in Arsenal football history, leaving the club. He is an idol of mine, and you'll be hearing a lot more about Arsenal as we go through this shelf. We have this gorgeous book up next called Royal Arsenal Champions of the South by Mark Andrews, Andy Kelly, and Tim Stillman. It's this gorgeous little volume from Legends Publishing, and it details the early historiography of Arsenal Football Club from its emergence in the 1880s up until I think the 1920s, when it avoided from Woolwich Square to Arsenal that it is today. We have Red Card by Ken Bessinger. This one I wasn't 100% sure on at the time when I first started reading it, but when I really got into it, it read more like a political thriller. It deals with the the FBI sting into FIFA from 2015. The most worrying thing about this book is that a lot of the people who were involved in it, but weren't formally charged, are still active in the FIFA and UEFA communities today. Next up, we have Stillness and Speed by Dennis Bergkamp. Bergkamp is one of the greatest footballers to ever play the game, and he was privileged enough to play for Arsenal Football Club. It's a fun biography. Doesn't go into a lot of the stuff written after he had finished up his career in football, which is fair, but it's still a really interesting examination into the mind of the Iceman. Next up, we have What We Think About Football, What We Think About When We Think About Football by Simon Critchley. This is a fun blend of philosophy and football. The only downside is Simon Critchley is a Liverpool fan as opposed to being an Arsenal fan, so all of the examples came across as very Scouse biased. Next, we have Clickbait Life as a Modern Football Fan by Darren Berry. This is a fun way of approaching a novel, a book, similar to how Fever Pitch is structured. Instead of being chapters at a time, it is more about after each individual match. This one is about Unai Emery's first season in charge of Arsenal Football Club. I know Berry has a second book coming out dealing with the COVID crisis, again by Legends Publishing, but haven't had my chance to get my hands on that one yet, but this one is a very fun read. Next, we have the mammoth tome, The Age of Football, The Verbal Game of the 21st Century by David Goldblatt. I've been working my way through this for a while. It's just, it's very dense, as you can see. It's fascinating, but it's still incredibly dense, but it's a cracking read so far. He's also got When the Ball Was Round, which is a history of football up until the end of the 20th century. Here we have another one by David Goldblatt, The Game of Our Lives, The Meaning and Making of English Football. This is a fun read. I read it up in just before England crashed out of the Euro final. It was an interesting read because it blends a lot of politics and sociology into the understanding of where England is as a national identity in terms of football and just as a country. The only downside is about this edition, it's sponsored by William Hill. And while it's great to have Sports Book of the Year, it's still a betting company, and betting in sports should not get along. So if you're a fan of the YouTube channel HITC7s, this one shouldn't be a surprise to you. This is England's Greatest Defender, The Untold Story of Neil Franklin by Alfie Potts Harmer. Neil Franklin was a it's an incredibly interesting life. And I'm not going to spoil much of it because Alfie does a fantastic job as well as talking about it. And I think you should all read this book. So this is the first of the Triple Threats by Amy Lawrence. Amy Lawrence is a fantastic Arsenal-based journalist and a Gooners fan as well, which is always a good thing. So this one is an inside look at the invincible 03-04 season where Arsenal went played 38, won 26, drew 12, and lost 0. It's drawn from player testimony, fan testimony, manager interviews, and it's just fantastic. They've also done a documentary of this as well, and it's worth a watch. Despite being an Arsenal fan, I was not alive, or I was alive but not really watching football for the 03-04 one. Now for 89, I was definitely not alive, I'm only 24. But when I was reading this, and they had a whole chapter dedicated to when Michael Thomas scored the winner at Liverpool on the final day of the season, I got chills. I think this is a fantastic, and it's just a gorgeous edition as well. We have The Wenger Revolution, The Club of My Life by Stuart MacFarlane, Amy Lawrence, and Arsene Wenger. I love Arsene Wenger. There he is on my wall. Yeah, he is just phenomenal, and this is a really wonderful retrospective tribute to the man who made Arsenal Football Club what it is today. We have Rocky, The Tears and Triumphs of David Rocastle by James Layton. As with a lot of Arsenal cult heroes, Rocky was a bit before my time, but I've heard him speak with I've heard people speak about him with such veneration that I could not order this in. It took about 3 months to get in through work, but hopefully when I'm feeling up to it, it should be a fascinating and cracking read. Next we have Per Mertesacker's Big Friendly German, his autobiography written in collaboration with Raphael Hongerstein. Per is a model footballer and just an all-round fantastic person. This biography is really, really fascinating. Deals with his life and how he was so close to quitting football, and it really paints a picture of what sort of person he did eventually become. And I think it's a fantastic read, not just as a sports biography, but as a great biography nonetheless. I have James Montague's 31-0 on the road with football as outsiders. Now, football, as in a lot of things, you do get minnows and you get massive giants. This one is about various minnows trying to qualify for the 2014 World Cup in Brazil. James Montague writes with humour, and it's a really fascinating insight, especially given the current light of the state of football and what's going to be happening with athletes given the Taliban's takeover of Afghanistan. One by James Montague with The Billionaires Club, The Unstoppable Rise of Football's Super Rich Owners. Again, this one is really great. So we've gone from the minnows of 31-0 to the incredibly, incredibly disparate people in charge in the Billionaires Club, and I think it's a fantastic read, especially because there's so much overlap with the way that the world is now. For example, the owner of Chelsea Football Club, Roman Abramovich, is actually really close mates with Vladimir Putin, which does wonders for, this trend of globalization and the super rich. We've also got Thou Shall Not Pass, an Anatomy of Football centre-half by Leo Moynihan. I don't think there's any relationship to the other famous centre-half Moynihan, but I could be wrong. As someone who was a terrible centre-back and has played against a lot of centre-backs, this is a fun read. And hopefully coming into my next season of Sunday League, whenever football starts up again, I can use some of the knowledge gained from this one to try and get the better of them all. Next we have Mesut Ozil's Gunning for Greatness. Ozil was one of the first superstar in my memory that Arsenal signed, and he really gave light into the team, and it's a shame to see what happened. This book is a really fascinating insight into dealing with the racial issues that plague him as a German-Turkish dual national, and it really goes into a lot of the struggles and the racist issues that he had to face growing up as a footballer. Now, it's only Ray Parlour's autobiography, The Romford Pele, by the Romford Pele, obviously. Parlour was a bit before my time in terms of watching, but it was still a fantastic issue into really dealing with the old school of, English football and Arsenal football and just top league, Premier League and Championship football at the time, and just what it means to really wind down your career and just make way, but also just to have fun while you're playing football as well. Jasper E's Wenger, the legend. It's a short little biography it was the first real biography of Wenger that I'd read, apart from the Wenger Revolution, and it really shed light into the man that is Arsene Wenger. It was obviously written a few years ago. I think it finished 2014, 2015, but it was a really fascinating insight and really made me anticipate the eventual release of My Life in Red and White, which we'll talk about in just a second. So we have Arsenal, the Story of a Football Club in 101 Lives by Anton Rippon. So this one is a bit different in terms of history. It's more of a big, broad sort of thing. And it's a really wonderful insight into how 101 different people shaped and were shaped by Arsenal Football Club. Like, he goes into stuff about Reg Lewis, Wenger, Herbert Chapman, Thierry Henry. And it's just a really great insight and a general history all around. Next up, we have Supporting Arsenal is a Funny Old Game by Dave Seeger, Alan Davis, Ramesh Ranganathan, Matt Lucas, and other famous high-profile comedic Arsenal fans. It was a really great look because you really get a sense of what Arsenal means to different people, because ultimately when you're supporting a team, it means exactly what it means to you. And it's really fascinating to see the similarities and the differences between you and someone else. And because they're all comedians, it's all really funny. If you're a big fan of the Guardian football roundup, this shouldn't come as a surprise to you. With David Squires' The Illustrated History Fall of Fame. This one is a hilarious sort of read because it's David Squires and he does really easily accessible but also in the know football comics. And it's just this really gorgeous hardcover edition with it's just beautiful. We have Adrian Tempany's And the Sun Shines Now, How Hillsborough and the Premier League Changed Britain. This is an interesting read because, as opposed to a lot of different football books, it wasn't so much about the football, but Thatcherite politics and the attempted takeover of Manchester United by Rupert Murdoch, which I didn't know about, and just about how football became the cultural mainstay that it is. And it was a really eye-opening insight. On arrival, we have Jonathan Wilson's The Outsider, A History of the Goalkeeper. As I said a few videos ago, lockdown sort of made the brain just depart the building. Haven't read this one yet. Should be getting around to it soon, but it looks fascinating. Jonathan Wilson Train, we have Inverting the Pyramid, A History of Football Tactics, the 10th anniversary edition. It's a fun, cute little edition. This one is a really great read, and it really, there's so much about football tactics and how it's evolved. And like, they didn't have a goalkeeper for 30 years, and that's astonishing. They played two at the back, and that's ridiculous to me. But yeah, it was a really interesting insight into how football works. I have A Life in Football by Ian Wright. And this one is a fascinating, wonderful insight into the world of London in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and the issues that Wright had to deal with in growing up as black and being a popular footballer. Fun fact, his transfer fee from Crystal Palace to Arsenal involved a lot of gym equipment because the Crystal Palace gym didn't have anything. Here we have the pride of my collection, Arsene Wenger's My Life in Red and White. This was the best football book that I read last year, and when I found out that this was being released, I couldn't not spring for the gorgeous hardcover with the exclusive Q&A in the back. Arsene Wenger was the only manager that I knew for most of my life at Arsenal. It seemed ridiculous that he would ever leave Arsenal, and it broke my heart when he did. This is a fascinating biography to read, delves into his philosophy, and there's so many lessons that you can apply to day-to-day life that I think everybody should read this book. Football section now, so here we have the Bhagavad Gita as it is, and the Srimad Bhagavatam, chapters 1 to 8. These two I got waiting for my uncle in town by a Hare Krishna, I believe. Yeah, haven't read them yet, not sure if I will, but they look nice. We have Norse Mythology by Neil Gaiman. Fun story about this, whenever I'm at work, this book always seems to end up in the sci-fi fantasy section, even though it's a retelling of Norse myths, similar to how Stephen Fry is tackling the Greek myths in his series. This is a great retelling, and it really told it with Gaiman's unique approach to storytelling. Can't have a section on myths and religion without having Mythology by Edith Hamilton. This one is just the absolute god tier, excuse the pun, of mythological research. There's just so much in there and so many stories, and it's worth having. Legends by Anthony Horowitz. This one I've had for absolute years, and it's, I think, one of the books that really got me into being so interested in myths and mythology. And it's just a great telling. It is designed for younger readers, but the stories in there are so different, and there's so many ones that you don't usually get in retellings that I think it's worth reading for anyone. Science of Monsters by Matt Kaplan. Why monsters came to be and what made them terrifying. This is a fun blending of like anthropology and sort of imaginary biology and like the study of myths, and it was so far it's been a fun look at why monsters are the way they are and why we imagine them to be the shapes that they are. The last time you'll see this man on my list, this is John Krakauer's Under the Banner of Heaven. This is a I can't even, there's not enough words for how eye-opening and amazing this book was. It really goes into the problems that fundamental Mormonism has, and Mormonism as a whole to a degree, and just the way that it is and has existed. It was just awesome. Corey O'Brien double feature. I don't think I've ever seen anyone else talk about these books. So we have Zeus Grants Stupid Wishes and George Washington is Cash Money. And these are very much humorous pistaches, but also really good retellings of various myths. So we have just a general world mythology one, and then we have ones that are suited to the US. A lot of the US ones I didn't know about since I'm not American, but it was fun to read about nonetheless. On my top shelf, we have Heaven and Hell, A History of the Afterlife by Bart D. Ehrman. I'll be honest with you, friends, I don't remember ordering this. I don't remember buying this book, but look how cool it looks. It's like this great history of, I think it's the emergence of afterlife myths in early Christianity, potentially. I used to be Christian, and now I'm not. Don't really have any faith, but it just looks really cool and really fascinating. And once I read it, I'll let you know what it's all about. The Altar Boys by Suzanne Smith. I haven't read this one yet, but given the current propensity for the sort of behaviour that is described by various religious institutions in Australia, and the depressing nature of the content material, it will take me a while to build myself up to this, but I'm sure it'll be a fantastic book nonetheless. Number 2. So we have The Doctor Who Fooled the World, Andrew Wakefield's War on Vaccines by Brian Deere. This is an incredibly interesting and fascinating insight into Andrew Wakefield, who was the doctor who first said that the MMR vaccine causes autism in children, which is obviously not the case. This one I've been taking slowly just because it's such an incredibly depressing read more than anything, but it's great. Sunshine, The Diary of a Lap Dancer by Samantha C. Ross. This one I bought because I like memoirs and I like reading things a little bit different. Haven't read this one yet, but it just seems like a bit of fun and a bit of lightheartedness. Might crack it open if this lockdown keeps going on longer. Benjamin Gilmore's The Gap. Now this was a read, ladies and gentlemen of the audience. This one is so good. I didn't want to read this in like the 5 hours of reading time that it took, but I just couldn't put it down. This is just awesome. I really want to track down the rest of Benjamin Gilmore's books. This is in the shortlist for my favourite book that I read this year. James Acaster's Classic Scrapes. James Acaster is a hilarious comic that I love. I love his awkward stylings. And this one was just like hanging out with a mate who knows how to tell a story. And it's got a man and cabbages all over it. It's great. James Acaster's second novel or book, Perfectly Sound Whatever. This one is a really great look. Originally I wanted to do this by listening to every album that he mentioned, but I could never really find the time to listen to them all. But I would recommend reading this and listening to some of the albums because he's got some really great musical taste. Next we have David Attenborough's Life on Air. Haven't had a chance to read this one yet, but it looks fascinating. Erskine's Lament by Shalom Auslander. This one I got on special from a bookstore up in Sydney, in the main centre. This one I haven't read yet, but it looks really interesting. Similar to that new one that came out a few weeks. Ufiosa Zuko by Dante Bosco, voice of Zuko. This one was an awesome, just 3 times awesome read. Really dealt into the issues growing up in LA as a Filipino American and the issues that Dante has had to face as an actor. And as someone who's a massive fan of Zuko, I just couldn't resist getting the edition. Roads to Sata, A 2,000-Mile Walk Through Japan by Alan Booth. Sorry if the lighting's been a bit weird. My flat does not have the best lighting. This one I finished the other week. I'll talk about it in my August wrap-up. This one was really fascinating. He walked from the top of Japan to the bottom of Japan. Ignore the child. And it was just a really great insight. Obviously, he did this back in the 70s, so a lot of the story would be different now, but it was still really great. We also have Lee Kun-shin's Mao's Last Dancer. Fun story about this. I read the young reader's version many years ago for primary school, and then coming back to reading the adult version. It's so much better, and I would really recommend it, especially if you've seen the film or read the young reader's version. Here we have This Modern Love by Will Derbyshire, Just Ignore Him by Alan Davies, Secrets for the Mad by Dodie Clark, aka Dodie, The Beginner's Guide to Winning the Nobel Prize by Peter Doherty, The Girls by Chloe Higgins. Chloe was a tutor of mine, and this is a really fascinating read about the intersectionality between grief and sex and interpersonal relationships. Fresh Off the Boat by Eddie Huang. This one was really funny. I first heard about this because I watched the TV show back in the day. Still trying to track down a copy of his second book, Double Cup Love, but this one was really funny and really worrying at the same time. This Is Going to Hurt by Adam Kay. This was my favourite book of last year. I think it's a really hilarious and heartbreaking memoir about the state of the medical system in Britain, which obviously I'm not part of, but it's still a really fascinating insight and really set me down the path of reading medical memoirs, which you'll see coming up. We have Into Thin Air by Jon Krakauer. Obviously, I don't really need to say much about Jon Krakauer. If you've heard about him, you should read them. If you haven't, it's awesome. On this one, John was a journalist up on Everest during the 1996 Mount Everest disaster. We have this gorgeous Picador edition of Into the Wild by Jon Krakauer, in which John follows the life and eventual death of Chris McCandless. It's also a fantastic film. And here we have Classic Krakauer by Jon Krakauer, which is just a series of collections of essays. I think the one about surfing in here is probably the best, and I just love how Jon Krakauer writes. Here we have Dear Life by Dr. Rachel Clark. This one is in my shortlist for my favourite books that I've read this year, and it details how Dr. Clark moved into pathology and working in palliative medicine, and contrasted with the fact of her father dying. In the Midst of Life by Jennifer Worth. Jennifer Worth was a nurse. She also was the author of the books behind The Call the Midwife, as you can see just there. This one is a really fascinating insight, and I've actually used it as a university textbook or university reference in a few of my bioethics essays. Emotional Female by Yumiko Kadota. This one is also in my shortlist of favourite books to read this year, and this one examines the institutional biases that many people face in trying to study medicine, especially if you're not white and you're not male. And it's just told with this lovely tone of voice, and it's just a really great read all around. Then we also have The Trauma Cleanup by Sarah Krasnostein. This one is a fascinating insight into the life of Sandra Pankhurst, who's recently passed away. And it was just a really fun, well, not fun as in like exciting, or not fun as in happy, but fun as in fun to read sort of book. Here you have Mary's Last Dance, sort of a companion to Lee Kun-sin's Mao's Last Dance. I haven't had a chance to read this, but I've heard really good things about it. Here you have The Wild Truth by Corinne McCandless, who's the sister of Chris McCandless of Into the Wild notoriety. This one is a really eye-opening and fascinating insight, because it talks about a lot of the stuff that John either didn't know or didn't mention. And if you're a big fan of the whole Chris McCandless story, then this is definitely a read for you. We have Long Way Round by Ewan McGregor and Charlie Borman. Growing up as a boy, some of my fondest memories are watching this TV show with my dad and my siblings, and then listening to the soundtrack in the car, and it was just a really great retrospective and going back to that time and place. We also have Long Way Down by the same authors. Both of these books have made me want to travel a lot more and learn to ride a motorcycle, which my mother would probably hate me for. We have Long Walk to Freedom by Nelson Mandela. Obviously, you can't not sort of read this or want to read this or buy this. Haven't had a chance to read it yet, just because it is a bit of a tome. We have Admissions, A Life in Brain Surgery by Henry Marsh. I actually also own Do No Harm, which is his other book, but it's currently out on loan. This one was really great in examining a lot of the life that a top-rated neurosurgeon, and as a big member of the British Medical Institution, what you would face when you're faced with your retirement. We have The Second Best Job in the World by Julian Mather. I haven't had a chance to read this one yet. I got it for Christmas a few years ago from my aunt, but it looks fun. Here we have North Korea Journal by Michael Palin. This one was a really eye-opening look into the world of North Korea, which is not something that gets a lot of depiction in media. And it seems like a really fascinating place to write and read about. Here we have Ramesh Ranganathan, Straight Outta Crawley, Memoirs of a Distinctly Average Human Being. Ramesh, I think, is one of the best comics to be working the British scene at the moment. And I think he's just really funny in the way that he presents material on race and music and football and teaching and just all about his life. We have Arden Rose's Almost Adulting, Leslie Rowland's Why Can't the English, Dr. Richard Shepard's Unnatural Causes. This one is a fascinating and eye-opening look in, I know I've said fascinating a lot in this, but a lot of these books are into the world of pathology. And Dr. Richard Shepard has done a lot of cases, like he worked on the Hungerford Massacre, he's worked on 9/11, he was flown out for the Bali bombings, and it's just really different approach to looking and writing about medicine. We have The Gulag Archipelago by Alexander Solzhenitsyn, I Know This to Be True by Greta Thunberg, No One Is Too Small to Make a Difference, also by Greta, Snakes and Ladders by Angela Williams. Angela is a former professor and tutor of mine. This one is a really, really great book, especially if you're interested in prison or legal proceedings or just how to deal with your life kind of being not great and then putting it back together. And it was just a really great memoir. Here we have Breathtaking by Dr. Rachel Clark, which is working in the NHS in the first 4 months of the COVID epidemic. Life in His Hands, The True Story of a Neurosurgeon and a Pianist by Suzanne Wyndham. Your Life in My Hands, a junior doctor story by Rachel Clark. This one is a fantastic polemic, similar in vein to This Is Going to Hurt, but a lot more about the political and the politicization of the NHS and the way that the Tories keep screwing it over. The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. My single cookbook, Panna Chocolate The Recipes. Panna is an Australian brand that do a lot of really great vegan chocolates. Memories We Made by Ed Sheeran, Christine Goodwin, and John Sheeran. Off my music collection, we also have A Visual Journey, Ed Sheeran. This is about the Multiply album. Very excited for the new Equals album coming out this year. I've also got the tour book from the Joshua Tree 2019 album tour. Well, not yet. I have The Wall by Greg Duncan. This was an art installation that we rented up on a school trip on Tasmania, and it's these huge walls of woodwork that are just simply great. So if you're ever in the area, try and check it out. And finally, to finish up this shelf, we have Stalin's Wine Cellar by John Baker and Nick Place. So starting off the Humour shelf, we have Is This Anything by Jerry Seinfeld, Humans, An A to Z by Matt Haig, The QI Book of Advanced Banter, Bill Bailey's Remarkable Guide to Happiness by Bill Bailey, Seinfeldia by Jennifer Kishen Armstrong, The Story of Life by Chris Simpson's Artist, and Motivational Quotes to Help You Be More Positive also by Chris Simpson's Artist. These two are just really nice, wholesome reads. We have Mulvania, A Land Untouched by Modern Dentistry by Santo Chalaro, Tom Kleisner, and Rob Sitch. Come on, focus. I'm a big fan of the whole jet lag travel series. Sebastian Falk's Pistache Returns, Fridge and Magnets of Bastards by Mark Dappen, Tragedy of the Sith's Revenge, William Shakespeare's Star Wars, Verily a New Hope, The Empire Striketh Back, and The Fourth Doth Awaken, all by Ian Deutscher. And then we have this one of Australia, I can't really say the word because I don't want to be demonetized, by Rick Furphy and Jeff Rissole, obviously fake names. It's a really great Facebook page as well. Overheard of the Bookstore by Judith Trotter and The Shameless Parody by Michael Gerber. Woke, A Guide to Social Justice by Titania McGraw. Dishonesty is the Second Best Policy and Other Rules to Live By. Thinking About It Only Makes It Worse. And Backstory, all by David Mitchell. The ScoMo Diaries, as told to Tosh Greenslade and Andrew Weldon. If you're an Australian and you'd know our current PMs are massive incompetent. My Dad Wrote a Porno by Rocky Flintstone, Jamie Morton, James Cooper, and Alice Levine. I've also seen these guys at the Sydney Opera House. How To, Absurd Scientific Advice for Common Real World Problems by Randall Munro. And What If, also by Randall Munro. The Darwin Awards 2 on Natural Selections by Wendy Northcutt. Aussie Man's Mad World by Aussie Man. 1001 Ridiculous Ways to Die by David Sovell and Matt Adams. We have the Batuta Advocate Roundup, the Batutas Australia, the Batuta Advocate How Good's Australia, and Batuta Advocate Australia 2020. We're a bit blessed for satire at the moment, considering a lot of our satire is more reliable than regular news, at least in Australia. We have Book Love by Debbie Tung. Quiet Leviathan, Quiet Girl in a Noisy World, an Introvert Story, also by Debbie Tung. And then Happily Ever After and Everything Between, the third book by Debbie Tung. We also have the Diggy Diggy book by the Yogscast. We also now move into our cultural sociology section. We have Alan de Botton, The Pleasures and Sorrows of Work. Red Notice, How It Became Putin's Number One Enemy by Bill Browder. Men at Work, Australia's Parenthood Trap by Animal Crab in the Quarterly Essay. Big fan of the Quarterly Essays. The Only Plane in the Sky, The Oral History of 9/11 by Garrett M. Graff. We have Chavs, The Demonization of England's Working Class by Owen Jones. Not sure about this white on the yellow, but it is what it is. We have The Believer, Encounters with Love, Death and Faith by Sarah Krasnostein. This one, it took me a while to get into it. The first half was a bit slow, but the second half really took off. We have Ghosts of the Tsunami by Richard Lloyd Parry. Jonathan Pye's Off the Record. Australia What Happened by Ben Podgy. The Men Who Stare at Goats by John Ronson. I won't lie, it did take me a while to realise that this wasn't satirical. The Pocket Atlas of Remote Islands, 50 Islands I Will Never Visit and Never Will by Judith Shalansky. This one was really, really fascinating and just cool all around. We also have Jonathan Ronson's Them, Adventures with Extremists. Dottie Charles's Outrage, Why Everyone is Shouting and No One is Talking. My Big Collection of Guy Delisle. G. Delisle. We have Shenzhen, A Travelogue from China. Pyongyang, A Journey into North Korea. Jerusalem, Chronicles from the Holy City. And the Burma Chronicles. Now, this one I'll be talking about a bit later on, probably in the month, because I'm doing an assignment all about Burma. But I think the artistic way in which G. Delisle works, it really lends itself to just some fantastic imagery. You should read them if you have any interest in them at all. I'm also aware they're all in different editions, and it does annoy me a little bit. We also have Fake Law, The Truth About Justice and Age's Lies by The Secret Barrister. This one I talked about a while back. I'm taking quite slowly just because there's so much legal jargon involved. It's great, but legal jargon. Another music book I've talked about, My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy by Kirk Walker Graves. This album is one of my favorite albums of all time. If you haven't listened to it, give it a listen. And this is a really great collection of essays about each individual track and the context that surrounds the whole album. Notes on a Nervous Planet by Matt Haig. This one is really fascinating and really helpful for me in terms of this year. For 6 months, I pretty much went off all social media. It was only the advent of the most recent pandemic that made me go back on. And here I am making YouTube videos now for a living. Well, not a living, but hopefully. And then we also have Dear Parents by Gabby Stroud. First up, we have on the science shelf, we have Catelyn Doughty's From Here to Eternity, Traveling the World to Find a Good Death. We have Lonely Planet's Travel Guide to the Universe, which is really, really cool. Eye in the Sky, The Fascination of Telescopes by Jeff Anderson. The Fabric of the Cosmos by Brian Greene. Aliens, Science Us, Is There Anyone Out There? Edited by Jim Al-Khalili. This one is a fascinating read. It's all about a variety of different essays. Pretty easy popular science to get into. I think I wore this in a duty-free airport. I just read it the whole plane trip. The Science of Star Wars, The Scientific Facts Behind the Force, Space Travel and More by Mark Brake and John Chase. Bill Bryson's The Body, A Guide for Occupants. Ancient Bones, Uncovering the Astonishing New Story of How I Became Human by Madeline Baum, Rodiger Braun and Florian Breyer. Wholly Irresponsible Science by Sean Connolly. Measuring the Universe, The Historical Quest to Quantify Space by Kitty Ferguson. Outer Space in Your Pocket by Michael Flynn. I got this on an excursion to a museum, I think the end of primary school, and it really kickstarted my love of astronomy. Adventures in Human Being by Gavin Francis. Just look how cool this cover looks. How cool is that? Very battered copy of A Brief History of Time by Stephen Hawking. We also have Unlocking the Universe by Stephen and Lucy Hawking. As I think I've mentioned on this channel, their kids book series, The Georgia Secret Key to the Universe, really inspired me to be interested in science, and I can't thank them enough for that. You have Kay's Anatomy. This one I bought because I really like Adam Kay. I think I might be a bit too old for this one, but it was still a good read nonetheless. Unsolved Mysteries by Joel Levy. This one was just a fun purchase from work. You know, bit of conspiracy, bit of mystery, nothing wrong with that. Abominable Science by Daniel Loxton and Donald R. Prothero. This one was just incredibly awesome. I read this in 2019 in my big 202 book year. And just the way that they seriously and scientifically map out and approach various cryptozoology is just great, and I would really recommend it. The Human Cosmos, A Secret History of the Stars by Joe Marchant. Born in Africa, The Quest for the Origins of Human Life by Martin Meredith. How to Make a Tornado, a New Scientist collection. Unsolved Science by Bill Price. Spying on Whales by Nick Pienson. This one was a surprising read. I didn't think I'd enjoy this much as it is, and I think cetaceans are just simply amazing animals, and people need to read more about them. The Wasp That Brainwashed the Caterpillar by Matt Simon. This very old library edition of The Meaning of Evolution by George Simpson that I think I nicked from my dad's books that he was throwing out. Mysteries Uncovered, True Stories of the Paranormal and Unexplained by Emily G. Thompson. The Future of Life by Edward O. Wilson. Essential Einstein by Shana Pryor and Cynthia Phillips, PhD. An Australian icon, Dr. Carl Krusnelewski's Never Mind the Bollocks, Here's the Science. And Doing It by everyone's favourite YouTube sex educator, Hannah Witten. We've also got The Science of Rick and Morty by Matt Brady, The Anthropocene Reviewed by John Green, and Dan Hooper's At the Edge of Time. To my environmental/vegan shelf, so we have A Life on Our Planet by David Attenborough. This one is the only hopeful climate change book I've ever read. Not that there's a lot of hopeful climate change books out there. Adani and the War Over Coal by Quentin Beresford. Man, the Adani coal mine. I'm not going to get into it because this video is going to be way too long, but another time maybe. On Eating Meat by Matthew Evans. Poached, Inside the Dark World of Wildlife Trafficking by Rachel Loe. The Sixth Extinction, An Unnatural History by Elizabeth Colbert. The Re-Origin of Species by Toril Kornfeld. The Carbon Club by Marion Wilkinson. This one was one of my top picks for reading last year, and it really goes into how the Conservative governments here in Australia have employed various industries and agencies to try and avoid any sort of positive environmental movements. It's very sobering. The Uninhabitable Earth, A Story of the Future by David Wallace Wells. Rise of the Necrofauna by Britt Ray. Oh, dropped it. On Eating Animals by Jonathan Safran Foer. What If We Stopped Pretending by Jonathan Franzen. And The World Without Us by Alan Weisman. On the history shelf, we have SPQR by Mary Beard. Night Walking by Matthew Beaumont, which I bought because of the cover, because, oh my goodness, look how gorgeous this cover is. Japan's Imperial Conspiracy by David Bergamini. We have Maps That Change the World by John O.E. Clarke. Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind. Fun fact, this is the book that made me go vegetarian all those years ago. And Homo Deus, A Brief History of Tomorrow. Both of those were written by Yuval Noah Harari. We have Big History, Cynthia Stokes Brown. This one was actually a uni textbook that I held on to because it was really interesting. Bill Bryson's A Short History of Nearly Everything, which I know some people hate, but I really loved. A Brief History of the Samurai by Jonathan Clements. A History of Reading by Stephen Roger Fisher, no relation. Greatest Mysteries Yet Unexplained by Lauren Doncaster and Andrew Holland. Just look how insane this cover is. The Golden Maze by Richard Feidler. Mawson by Peter Fitzsimons. Rope, A History of the Hanged by Amanda Howard. Kapuscinski's The Soccer War, which I feel uncomfortable saying, but it's not called The Football War, so alas, I must make do. The History of the Popes by Enrico Lancioni, or Lancioni, one of the three. The World of Law, Dreadful Places by Aaron Mankey. And Wicked Mortals, also by Aaron Mankey. I've been a huge fan of the Law podcast since I think 2015. So I had to buy the books. 1421, The Year China Discovered the World by Gavin Menzies. Now, I'm not some sort of weird conspiracy nut. I just wanted to read this to see how cooked Gavin Menzies was. Lot Moller's Bees and Their Keepers, From Waggle Dancing to Killer Bees, From Aristotle to Winnie the Pooh. The Time Traveller's Guide to Medieval England by Ian Mortimer. Dark Emu by Bruce Pascoe, fairly controversial book here in Australia. John Romer's A History of Ancient Egypt from the First Farmers to the Great Pyramid. The Knights of Bushido by Lord Russell of Liverpool. Again, I took this from my dad's bookshelf, so he didn't want it. I figured may as well pump out the numbers. We have this home reference book of library dinosaurs that I got given by a uni mate. We have Finding George Orwell in Burma by Emma Larkin. The River of Lost Footsteps by Thant Myint Yu. And The Hidden History of Burma, A Crisis of Race and Capitalism, authored by Thant Myint Yu. Finally, we have The Book of Trespass, Crossing the Lines That Divide Us by Nick Hayes. Into the writing section, we have The Subversive Copy Editor by Carol Fisher Seller, Margaret Atwood's On Writers and Writing, Representation by Hall, Evans and Nixon, My Style Manual for Australia, Steve Healy's How I Became a Famous Novelist, the best book on writing I think there is, Stephen King's On Writing and Memoir of the Crowd. Table books at the moment, we have The Atlas of Vanishing Places by Travis Elborough, Will My Cat Eat My Elbows by Caitlin Doughty. This one's just on my coffee table so I can remind myself to finish it. We have Extinction and Evolution by Niles Eldridge. We have Walking with Dinosaurs, A Natural History by Tim Haynes. And finally, this monstrosity, Paleo Art, Visions of the Prehistoric Past by Zoe Lachaise. This one is a history of paleo art and how it was represented from the earlier 16th century up until the present day. And I think it's just utterly gorgeous and worth the $150 that I spent it on. So that is everything in my non-fiction bookshelf that isn't out on loan. Some barnacles. And that's all for this week, and I'll see you for next week's video.